United States, for example, there's been some effort to collect hate crimes at the national level. The Uniform Crime Report, which is run by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, collects hate crime data, and also the National Crime Victimization Survey also collects some hate crime data. Although these sources do give us some understanding of the scope and extent of the problem, at least in the United States, the data suffer some pretty serious problems. I mean, there's well-known measurement error in both of these sources, and it seems that a lot of those errors are compounded when trying to study hate crime. Significantly, 60% of hate crime victims are found to not report their crime to the police. And so the vast majority of hate crime victims don't share that information. So even though the police are the primary provider of information in the Uniform Crime Reports, police are missing a large part of the picture. In addition, not all police departments participate in the Uniform Crime Reports, and so there's a large number of departments that their data isn't available to study. And a good part of the population also doesn't reside in some jurisdictions that are participating in hate crime research with the Uniform Crime Reports. Similarly, victims in the National Crime Victimization Survey, again, may not report their hate crime victimization when being questioned as part of the study. Victimization in general is generally underreported in that study. However, victims of hate crime represent a special case of underreporting given the particular type of psychological damage that is caused by the events. What are some of the obstacles to collecting hate crime data? So I'm going to just talk about several. One is definitional issues. There's some debate about whether or not particular events should be included or should be excluded because of motive. Particularly, this particular issue is particularly challenging for some cases because it may be difficult to determine motive, and or because of the lack of information, there may also be multiple motives driving a particular offender's behavior that are not accounted for. A second critical reason is lacking mechanisms to really collect these data systematically. There are some government agencies, there's some community groups, some watchdog organizations, and even some media organizations that may collect hate crime data for a specific time frame. But these data are not systematically collected and not supported with funding that makes them sustainable. And so only a small amount of data are collected on each case. Often these sources simply list the identified individual or the specific crime that occurred. For example, the Anti-Defamation League will provide a list of all anti-Jewish attacks that may have occurred during a specific time frame. But the problem is that these ad hoc efforts have no uniform standard, may have employed inconsistent criteria, and at best capture only a handful of demographic characteristics on the victim as well as the offender. So what we get from these studies is severely limited information. Let me conclude by talking a little bit about some of the solutions to these challenges. We really have to, when thinking about hate crime, it's important to have good data about the community where the crime occurred. It's important to have information about the victim, about the offender, but also the response and who responded and what was the nature of the response. And so there are several questions that I think are worth asking or worth addressing with data in studying hate crime. One of those questions is, what is the breakdown of hate crimes in a particular jurisdiction comparing violent to non-violent hate crimes? In addition, it's really important to get a little bit deeper into this issue about why victims don't report to the police. What is the nature of that, and what can be done to address the underreporting of these crimes to the police? It's important to know what minority groups are least as well as most targeted by hate crime offenders, and what are some of the reasons for doing that. It would be important to know whether or not minority groups target other minority groups. How often do victims use community resources, and why don't they use those resources? Why don't victims reach out to the police and work with the police? Do police departments coordinate with those community organizations? Do we know what really motivates offenders to commit these acts? Another really critical way to sort of address these issues is collecting data more systematically. That is, in light of these sort of empirical gaps in the broader body of research as well as the theoretical gaps, what we don't know about offenders and why they offend, there's a significant need to develop additional data sources to understand these offenses. To that end, there is great value in using open sources, data sources to such as media reports, such as internet postings, such as police and court documents that may be made available through open sources, as well as social media. Really, to get at it, use these as sort of mechanisms to understand the community, victim, offender characteristics and response characteristics that are so critical to better understanding hate crime offending. Open source data has become increasingly used in scholarly work. It's been used successfully to study terrorism. It's been used to successfully study school violence, as well as cyber-related crimes and other rare events. And it's ideally suited to study hate crime and provide the kind of theoretical detail necessary to really understand the patterns of hate crimes in a particular community.